as we get older, we learn to question the things that we've been taught. And we learn that sometimes the things that we were taught were incorrect. It might be that many of the things that that particular source taught us were incorrect. And we learn that partly through talking with other people and hearing about other people's experiences, having our own experiences as well. And we learn, okay, that source wasn't correct on many things, but we don't tend to apply the same thing to sex.
Welcome everyone to another episode here on the IPS podcast. I'm Jellis Vaas, the founder of the IPS project and your host here on the show. Now in this episode, I had the pleasure of welcoming adult sex educator and coach Ruth Ramsay to talk about, well, I guess you might guess it, about sex. Sex is a very interesting topic, right? It evokes a lot of different emotions for people, ranging from pleasurable to traumatic to something in between. I mean, there's so much on this topic. Shame is a big part of it too, that many people actually feel. We don't talk a lot about sex with other people, right? Maybe we talk with our partner about it, even though it's not always a topic that many people talk about with their partner. But outside of our relationship, we don't discuss sex often, even though it is such a big part of many people's life, you know, of being a human. So therefore, I was very, very excited to invite someone such as sex educator and coach Ruth Ramsay, who has and who is still doing, so much incredible work on this topic in breaking the stigma and that shame that often is associated around sex, and who helps people to build a sex life that they're dreaming of. Now, here is a short bio about Ruth to highlight her expertise and experience. Ruth has made notable appearances in the media, boasting a rich background that spans over a decade as a striptease artist. Beyond this, she has contributed to the discussions about the intricate world of sex through her writing, engaged in modeling, and played a pivotal role in establishing the first union for adult workers in the UK. She is also a passionate activist for sexual rights, earning recognition through an award for her advocacy of the erotic rights of people with disabilities. Notably, her TEDx Talk, Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 Minutes, ranked up an extraordinary 1.5 million views within just a few months. I am very confident to say that you will learn more than a thing or two here in this episode with Ruth Ramsay, to break maybe some of that stigma that you might be feeling, or to improve your sex life. Now, to find any of the resources mentioned by Ruth, as she does share quite a lot of great resources in this episode, check out these show notes located in the description of this episode, or you can also go directly to the ipsproject.com/podcast and search for Ruth. There as well, you can find all the ways to connect with her. Now, having said all that, I hope that you will enjoy this episode with adult sex educator and coach Ruth Ramsay. Ruth, a warm welcome here to the IPS podcast. I'm really excited to be chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
So we are, of course, going to talk about, the work that you do today as a sex educator and coach, and also the work you did as a striptease artist. But I think a great place to kick off this interview would be to already talk about sex and shame. Because, most people enjoy sex. Most people have fantasies about sex. But also most people have some shame around sex. And some people have a lot of shame around it, right? And there are, of course, a lot of reasons why people have shame that I can already think of, but I don't talk about sex with people as frequently as you do. So I want to throw the question at you. What have you seen in your work where this shame, negativity, and stigma around the topic of sex, eroticism, and sexuality many times comes from?
Well, you've already given an element of that answer when you said, I don't talk to people about sex. like you do. Now, obviously, I know you meant in a work context.
Yeah,
and
right. Yeah,
the majority of people aren't talking about sex in a work context, but the majority of people aren't talking about sex at all. The shame around it is part of that, but then the silence around it perpetuates that shame. So for most of us, the message is that sex is something either dirty and wrong, or if not that, then certainly very private, something you do not talk about. I speak to people who are from faith backgrounds who have been taught that they will go to hell. We have from that extreme to the extreme, kind of the other extreme. People say, oh, I was never taught it was wrong, but at the same time, it was never talked about.
Yep.
Or it might be a situation such as with my upbringing, where I was given the impression sex is this wonderful, beautiful thing, but only for one special person. But whatever the background, wherever we originate from in that picture, the fact that we then don't talk about it, as I say, perpetuates that shame. We're never shown in film or TV or culture, we're never shown conversations about sex.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the ongoing problem. But yeah, going back to our early years, it's incredibly rare for me to hear of anyone who was given an upbringing and education around sex that didn't involve shame.
And for someone listening who has a lot of shame around sex, because like you said, they might have a religion that tells them it's a sin, or because of their upbringing, or because of whichever other reason, what is something you would already want them to know around shame going into this interview?
Well, what I would like them to do is to think back to where the sources of that shame come from, and whether life has proved those sources always to be right in other areas. So very often the sources of shame might come from, as we've said, from faith backgrounds or from parents, caregivers, teachers, etc. And as we get older, we learn to question the things that we've been taught. And we learn that sometimes the things that we were taught were incorrect. It might be that many of the things that that particular source taught us were incorrect. And we learn that partly through talking with other people and hearing about other people's experiences, having our own experiences as well. And we learn, okay, that source wasn't correct on many things, but we don't tend to apply the same thing to sex.
Yeah,
and we can realize when we do that, we can realize, hang on, I'm believing outright the source of this information. Or it could be, for example, an early boyfriend, girlfriend, partner who said something horrible to you about how you were sexually, for example. And that stayed with you and you've continued believing it. When you can recognize that a lot of the things, most of the things they said maybe were incorrect. So look back at where this source of the shame comes from.
Yeah.
Can you actually trust that? And you'll probably find that life experience has taught you no. And so then that's the starting point then to try to kind of create your own new set of beliefs around sex. But I suppose the thing that I would want people to know, which I think was your question, was that you're entirely normal.
Yeah.
If you feel shame and you struggle to even think about your sex life, let alone talk about it. We think everyone's talking about it, but actually most people aren't. So you're entirely normal.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, often hearing that it's normal to feel this can already be a big comfort to many people, right? Yeah. So we are, of course, going to talk more about shame throughout this interview. It's such a big topic that it's impossible to not, pop up again. But I'm curious to just shift gears a little bit and to ask you a couple of things about the work that you did as a striptease artist. Very curious about that, actually. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? But you worked for a decade as a striptease artist, right?
Just over a decade, yeah.
Or just over, yeah. Okay. I know this question might have been thrown a lot at you. So I apologize for asking it, once again, but what got you interested in becoming a striptease artist, and how did you get introduced to that world? Because it's not, in school, you don't see that on the list of jobs to pick, right? So yeah, how did this all started actually?
Well, I had an awareness somehow of what a striptease artist was, or this concept of someone standing on a stage and slowly taking their clothes off. I had an awareness of that from a young age. I don't know where or how. I do know that my parents had all of the Ian Fleming James Bond books, the books that the films were based on.
Yeah.
And I know that there's various scenes in striptease clubs in the Bond books. So maybe flicking through books, I found something. But I had this kind of vision, and I just thought seemed like the most amazing thing in the world. But as you say, it's not something you talk about. I do remember in my kind of early to mid teens being given a set of kind of silk scarves by an auntie for Christmas or something like that, and tying them all around myself and dancing in my bedroom and taking one off at a time. So I had that awareness. But this is what would this be like, late 80s, early 90s. You say being a striptease artist isn't on anyone's career plan, but these days, I think it actually is.
Yeah,
with
right.
Instagram and the glamorization of the industry. But back then, I never thought in a million years that it could actually happen. So I worked hard on my other big passion, which was writing. And I wanted to be a journalist and write about women's issues for the big glossy magazines. And I went to journalism college, got what was at the time the best journalism degree in the country, worked very hard to get that. And I was working in fashion business journalism in my mid-20s when I saw an advert for London School of Striptease. And it was brand new. This is around 2001. I wasn't into fitness or dance or anything like that very much at all. But a friend of mine had convinced me to go to this dance fitness class with her. And on the notice board in this dance studio, I saw London School of Striptease. And I was like, wow. I'd never confided this fantasy in anybody ever, because I thought I'd just be laughed at. I thought it was ridiculous. But I thought, oh, here's an opportunity to go and explore this fantasy. So that's what I did. And I had no idea that that was going to lead to me ditching the fashion journalism job and becoming a full-time striptease artist. But that's how it started.
How long is the training actually? Or like at the school there?
Well, as I say, this was in 2001.
Yeah.
So I don't think London School of Striptease exists anymore. But back then, they were very new. And if I remember correctly, there was a beginner's course, and it was either 8 or 12 weeks, that kind of duration. And about 12 women there for all sorts of reasons, all very, very nervous.
Yeah.
But if I recall correctly, everyone finished the course and got so much from it. So then I signed up for the intermediate course, which again was maybe 10 weeks or so. And at the end of both of the courses, we had a guest performance from a real life stripper. And I was so excited. I was like, wow, starstruck. And then they stayed on and watched our end of course little shows that we did for each other. And in both cases, they came up to me afterwards and said, if you wanted to actually do this for a living, you could do it. You're good. You've got it. So off I went. So for a year, I did the journalism and dancing sort of side by side, and then packed in the journalism altogether and became a full-time striptease artist.
What did you do differently? Why did they come up to you? What did they see in you?
I don't know. They might have said that to everyone to be nice and boost their confidence. I don't know.
Well, who knows, right?
But
Okay.
I do know that I'd worked hard on putting my routine together and my outfit and things. And I absolutely loved it. So if I was to be able to contact them now, my guess would be it was enthusiasm and passion for it.
That does a lot. That does a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your striptease name or striptease artist name was Solitaire, right?
Solitaire, yeah.
Why that name? Did you choose it, or did they give it to you, or how does that work?
Well, Solitaire was one of the Bond girls.
Yes.
Jane Seymour in Live and Let Die, the Bond film. So I've already mentioned thinking that the Bond books might have been part of my inspiration. I know that when James Bond films were on the TV at Christmas, I would love the opening sequences with typically scantily clad dancing girls at the start. And I already had in my mind that one of my kind of USPs as a stripper was going to be dancing to the James Bond theme tunes, to the music. So I was talking about this with the woman who was running the course, the striptease courses, because we'd often all go for a drink in the bar around the corner from the dance studio afterwards, and talking about, what would your stage name be? And I said, I want a Bond girl name. And a lot of the Bond girl names are very ridiculous. I mean, Solitaire's a little bit ridiculous. But it was all like, that Jane Seymour, she was tall, long brown hair. What was her Bond girl name? And then someone said, it was Solitaire. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
So that's then what it became.
We talked a little bit about shame, right? I'm just curious, did you feel some shame or hesitation in the beginning telling people that you were striptease artists? And if you did, how did you become comfortable with it?
I didn't feel any shame. So for me, this was stepping into what felt like my life's purpose. And actually, it was kind of the opposite of shame. I was so full of it, if you understand that term. I was so full of it and like bursting with enthusiasm and joy and excitement. And for some people who were uncomfortable hearing about it, I recognize looking back that I went on and on and on about it. And I didn't take into account other people's discomfort necessarily. So I wasn't ashamed, but I did have a lot of people try to put shame on me.
Okay.
So I was told, you'll never get a proper job again after this. No employer will ever want you. No man will ever want you. You'll never find a husband. Not that I was thinking about that at 25, but no man will ever want you. No man will ever respect you again. All sorts of things. People tried to put shame on me, but I was so certain that this was my path that it didn't really affect me.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, right?
But another thing related to that is that the woman who ran London School of Striptease, Jo King, she's still involved in the industry, that was her real name, she said to me 2 bits of advice. She said, number 1, register as a self-employed worker immediately, because people will try to tell you it's not a proper job, it's dirty, it's wrong, and you need to be able to look them in the eye and say, I'm a self-employed worker, I file my taxes with HMRC, the tax body here. This is a legitimate job that I'm working hard at and building a career in, and you can hold your chin high. Then the other piece of advice from her was, when you audition at a club or a pub, if you get turned down, don't take it personally. That there's going to be so many knockbacks and you've got no idea why they've turned you down, and never take anything personally. But yeah, around shame, that first point of being able to say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a businesswoman, and I'm building this career. That was part of it as well.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice, actually, that she gave you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said that it's becoming more glamour, right? With Instagram and TikTok and everything. This job, do you see that? And I'm just curious, right? Do you see it as a good thing or as a bad thing, or how do you look on that?
I think overall, it's a tricky balance. I'm struggling to have an instant reply to that. I think it partly depends what lens you're looking at it through. So in terms of people feeling empowered to express themselves as sexual beings for their own pleasure and enjoyment. That is a good thing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
However, I'm not in the industry now, so I'm not fully up to date on what's actually happening on the ground in strip clubs. But I would imagine there's a lot of people, especially young women, going into the industry thinking it's going to be easy, glamorous. They're going to make lots of money very, very quickly. And it's not like that. I mean, we had that issue back when I was dancing. So I danced from, let's think, around 2002 to 2014. So during that time, particularly in the latter part of that time, it was just starting to become more acceptable and glamorous, and Spearmint Rhino was in London and Stringfellows and all this. And there'd be stories in the paper about lap dancers making 10 grand a night from a star footballer who came into the club, all that kind of stuff. And we would have young women turn up, as I say, thinking it was going to be incredibly easy and they were going to make a fortune. There's an amazing Instagram account. Can I call out, recommend an account? So there's
please.
An account called The Dance. Yeah. So there's a great Instagram account called The Dancer's Resource. I would have to double check the precise hashtag for that. And it's for strippers and people who are interested in and supportive of the community. And there's a lot of retired strippers on there as well. And that's great for giving you an insight of what the industry is actually like. And they are very against these TikToks of girls saying, look, here's the 5 grand I made last night, and here's the 6 grand I made the night before, of giving the impression that it's a very easy job, which it isn't. So that's the downside.
I guess that's a bit true for many jobs these days because of, social media, that they just show like, you just have to do this and that, and then you will earn a lot of money. That they just kind of make it sound like it's so easy. But most of the time, the truth is that hard work is required, and it's just as true in this field of job, right? So wait, what was the Instagram account again?
The Dancer's Resource.
Well, I will link it up in the show notes for people listening to find it. Before we continue with the interview, I just like to take a moment to mention, if you feel that you've gained some insights and lessons from this interview and you're curious to see what else we offer at the IPS Project, I recommend that you check out the IPS Academy, where we offer online courses taught by guests here on the IPS Podcast. Learn more about essential life topics such as mental health, relationships, the mind, and the body and brain through fun and interactive courses. Simply go to theipsproject.com/academy or check the description of this episode to find the link. Each course has a few lessons to try for free, so you can get a taste of what the course is like. We have countless reviews from other students, so you can see what others think. And there is a 30-day money-back guarantee if you end up not liking the course. Again, check them out at theipsproject.com/academy or by clicking on the link in the description of this episode. Having said that, let's return back to the interview. Today, you work as a sex coach and educator, right? What inspired you to start coaching? And as well, let me also ask, because I think many people don't know, and neither do I, what happens during such coaching sessions?
Well, the way I became an adult sex educator and coach, so I danced for 12 years. Mm-hmm. Within that time, I also started teaching striptease quite quickly after I became a striptease artist, because my experience of learning it had been so incredible. So I was teaching, I started running events with other dancers, I was doing modelling, I was doing activism around sexual rights, I was doing bits of journalism, all sorts of stuff in and around that world. Very, very busy, mostly in the UK, but a bit internationally. And I was totally consumed by it and I loved it. But towards the end of that 12 years, I'd met my now husband. Mm-hmm. To be with him meant moving to the countryside, basically, leaving the city. So leaving the environment where all the strip venues are, and becoming a stepmom, which was something I'd never imagined happening, having children in my life. Yeah. So my life changed a lot. And then the kind of venues that I loved dancing in were closing down with gentrification of the East End of London, stuff like that. Yep. So add together a lot of things. Also, I was getting into my late 30s, and mainstream stripping does have an expiry date of 40 generally. So I moved out of London. I threw myself into this new project of let's create a happy step family. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I'm actually the most proud of in my life, is that happened. During that time, I qualified and trained as a personal fitness trainer, because I thought it's going to be like stripping. I'll be on my feet. There'll be music on. I'll be self-employed. I'll be meeting lots of people, and I'll be in a intimate situation with people quickly. Yeah. So in a strip club, you might chat to someone for 10 minutes and then go for a lap dance with them. As a personal trainer, someone comes into your studio, you chat with them for 10 minutes, and then they're sweating on the floor in front of you. So it's an intimate situation, you know. Sure. So I did that, and I was kind of happy, but I didn't have that deep fulfillment that striptease and working in the sex industry and the adult industries have given me. And about once a year, I'd get my big suitcase of striptease outfits out and think I need to get rid of most of this. And I'd end up just crying and not able to get rid of anything. So I hadn't moved on from there. And so fast forward another couple of years, when my stepkids were old enough to know stepmom used to be a stripper and it meant so much to her, and she won awards and she did all this amazing stuff. I then started to allow myself to think, what do I want to do next for me in my life? I'm not fulfilled running this PT studio. And I knew I wanted to get back into the sexy world, but had no idea how to do that. Still living in a little village, etc., etc. But lots of people had said to me, you'd make a great life coach. Now, as you said 5 minutes ago, we're constantly told, oh, this industry, it's a boom industry. You're going to make a fortune. It's going to be easy. And at that time, it was life coaching. Adverts everywhere, become a life coach. Yeah. Or certainly here in the UK.
No, here in Belgium,
so I thought,
too.
Yeah. And everything from like offers, do a 2-day weekend course for £20 online and become a life coach, because it's not regulated. But anyway, I found a course that I liked the look of and thought I'd like to learn this just for my own self knowledge as well. And I did this 9-month life coaching diploma. And I didn't know what my niche would be, how I would use it. But then somebody who knew about my past, so that whole 12-ish years of experience, she knew about that, and she knew I'd done this diploma. And she came to me and said, I've got a proposition for you, or I want to ask you something. Would you coach me around my sex life?
Oh, yeah.
She said, can you use your new coaching skills? She didn't say it quite like this, but what she was saying was, can you combine your new coaching skills with your life experience? And with the life experience, where that comes in, she said to me, I feel so much shame around sex, around many of my desires. I'm turning 40, and she thought her time was limited. She said, I'm turning 40. I've got a finite number of shags left, is how she put it. I've got desires I've never explored. But she said, I can't even talk to my partner. I can't talk to anyone about sex.
Yeah.
But I feel that I could talk to you because of all the things that you did in striptease, etc. You're not going to judge me. I don't have to worry you'll slut shame me. I've never met anyone who I felt I could talk to, but I can talk to you. Do you think you can coach me about sex? And so that was the light bulb moment of, this is where it all comes together, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. So then I naively thought that I was just going to start as a sex coach. And coaching, just to clarify that for people, sex coaching is a conversational based process. It's not a physical process. people who have had business coaching understand it as sitting down and talking about your goals, etc., etc. But people outside of the business world maybe think of football coaching or that kind of thing, and they think sex coaching. Are you going to be in the bedroom with us? So no, it's a conversational based process, and it's for people who are able to look forward positively at their future, and people who are able to take positive action steps forward. For some people who have trauma, sexual trauma in their past that they haven't yet resolved through therapy or counselling, they're not in a place yet for coaching. And I would say
it's too
on
triggering,
discovery
or why?
calls, which is, sorry?
It's too triggering, or why?
Yeah, because you're not able to positively look forward and take action steps when you're being held back by unresolved trauma. So if somebody said to me, I want to have a better sex life, but anytime I try to get close to someone sexually, I just shut down, I freeze. And I think it's because I had an abusive relationship. I would say you need therapy or counselling to move through that. But if that same person came to me 6 months, a year later, which has happened, to say, through therapy, I've dealt with that, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's always there as part of my past, but I can now look forward and I'm ready to make positive change. That's where coaching comes in. But before people can make the most of that, of coaching, they need to have a certain basic level of understanding about how sex works, about anatomy, about desire, the kind of sex education that we should have had but didn't have at school. And I became aware of this quite quickly, trying to coach, for example, a woman to have more pleasure and then realizing that she didn't actually know where her clitoris was and that kind of thing. So it's like, okay, there's education needed first. And so then I, from there, developed an online course and various webinars, built up a list of amazing resources of books, podcasts, etc. And that's why I now call myself an adult sex educator and sex coach, because for the vast majority of people, the two need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And how long have you been doing this now?
3.5 years since I first started. So it was challenging timing, happening just as a pandemic hit. But that did give me a lot of time on the initial kind of planning stages of the business. So, and then in terms of how the business is going, it was steadily building. Anyone watching this who's started a business knows that there's lots of challenges. But then the big thing happened, and the reason you've contacted me, which is my TEDx talk.
Yeah.
So that has had a very, very positive impact, as you can imagine. So now I'm busy with a full roster of one-to-one clients, running my online course and getting lots of opportunities to speak in the press. And looking back, if all of this had happened when I started the business, I wouldn't have been ready for it, because I've now had 3.5 years of life experience of talking to people endlessly about sex, both clients and non-clients who are curious. And I've learned so much, and I've been able to become much more realistic about the challenges people are facing. So at the very start of this interview, you said, everyone enjoys sex, everyone this, everyone that.
Most people, right?
Or you
most
might
people.
have said most people,
Yes,
most people. But I would say that the majority of people aren't enjoying sex anywhere near as much as they could.
Okay, yeah.
And I now have much more of an appreciation of that. So yeah, everything has happened at the right time.
Well, I mean, also talking about the TEDx Talk, I mean, a big congrats, right? That's, I wanted to ask actually before we started, but I forgot about it. But yeah, did it change your life a lot?
Yes. Not quite as much as one might fantasize. If you'd said to me, your TEDx is going to go live in June, and by mid-November, it's going to have had 1.4 million views, what do you think your life will be like? I would have said, I'm going to have a waiting list, a year long of one-to-one clients, and I'm going to have 1,000 people on my course, etc. It's not been quite like that, but it has been a very, very positive impact, both kind of internally for me as well as externally. So in terms of my confidence that, yes, this is an area where people can change their lives. That's, I think, the most amazing thing about the talk going viral is it's shown that when it's presented in a certain way, the topic of sex and of improving one's sex lives, when it's presented in a certain way, people can lose that shame and they'll share it with their friends. Someone said to me that they were at dinner at their boyfriend's house. This is someone in their 20s. And her boyfriend's dad at dinner started talking about my TED talk, not knowing that she knew me. And the fact that people are talking about it and sharing it is proof that we can make positive change in this area. Yeah. So, yeah, it's very, very validating for me.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, and like, it's crazy because it has over 1 million views in just a couple of months, right? Which, like you said, it shows that people are very interested in this topic. Plus, I will also say the title, amazing title, right? Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 minutes. That's such a good title. Yeah. And for people listening, I will also put it in the show notes because I can really recommend watching it. It's a good TEDx talk, really. You said, the education part, right? That you're a sex coach and an educator. And like you said, this sex education is something that we didn't really get in school, which we should have. Now, everyone had some kind of sex education, right? Where you learn about, the importance of protection and about all the horrific diseases that you can end up with, right? But like most people, I learned only that part. I learned nothing about what men generally tend to like or what women generally tend to like or just the beautiful sides of what sex can be. Learned nothing about that. And most people learned nothing about that, right? Yeah. Let's say that you had to teach a class for a year of young people. And first of all, what age group would you want to focus on? And secondly, what topics would you teach them?
Well, first of all, I'll very much agree with you that the sex education most of us had was reproductive biology and disease prevention.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Wow. So in terms of age group, so as you know, I'm an adult sex educator. I always prefix the adult because sometimes people misunderstand and think I teach in schools, which I don't. When it comes to teaching younger people, younger than 16, I would always hand over to someone who's knowledgeable and qualified in child and young person psychology, etc. There is an incredible resource, sexpositivefamilies.com, which provides resources and guidance, age-appropriate information, starting right from kind of toddlerhood, at which point they're sort of suggesting teaching that your body is your own. So bodily autonomy can start right from a very young age. For me, ideally, if I was qualified to teach younger people, one would want to do that before they'd started learning too many negative lessons. And the starting point would be learning about themselves and their bodies as their own source of pleasure, including sexual pleasure. So before we even begin thinking about bringing someone else or other people into the picture, that your body is your own, that it is an amazing, wonderful generator of pleasure, that's healthy physically, mentally, and to kind of develop one's own sovereignty. So a sense of one's own rights and power when it comes to one's own body. Then from that place, we can then consider if or when to bring somebody else into it. But I think so many people, and something I hear from so many women who I coach, who've reached a point where they've decided they want a better sex life, and they're ready to take action steps through coaching. They'll say, sex has always been for someone else. It's always been for my partner's pleasure. And sometimes they'll say, not because the partners I've had have been selfish or horrible at all. Yeah. It's just how it's always been. Very often I hear from women, I was told as a woman, it's your duty to your boyfriend or husband or whatever, that it's about his pleasure. Women who are in midlife or older tell me that they were very much taught that. Don't expect it to be fun. Don't expect it to be pleasurable, but just lie back and get on with it. But unfortunately, even when I coach younger women, late 20s, early 30s, they'll say sex has always been something done to me and for somebody else's pleasure. So that would be the fundamental first lesson that I would teach in that scenario that you described.
This sounds
that your body is your own for your pleasure.
Yeah. This sounds... Wait, well, let me first ask, would there be another topic you would teach in that year to people?
Well, I was going to say you gave me a year, so we'd have a lot of topics. So I mean, first of all, it would be...
Not like 100 topics now, but just what would be another essential topic that you feel like, wow, we should have learned about this from an earlier age?
Anatomy and sexual science. The science of how the human body experiences desire. What we're shown in film and TV and culture as what sex should be. So if it's a heterosexual encounter, the penetrative intercourse is real sex and nothing else is real sex, for example. So I would try to help people vastly broaden their minds around what sex is. We've talked already about a sense of their own bodily autonomy and right to pleasure. Anatomy and sexual science, and communication, actually. There would be a big module on communication.
Verbal communication?
So learn about yourself first, understand yourself, and then how do you then explain those things, explain your sexual self to a partner, and how do you listen and understand when they're explaining themselves to you?
And for someone listening, since we didn't get that class from you, what would be a good first step to learn about, what you like yourself? Is there something of an exercise or something of a resource that you could recommend?
Well, in terms of the first step of understanding anatomy and sex science, there is the book that I recommend the most to people, which is called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. Okay. So she's a big speaker on the TED platform as well. When you look at it, it's kind of aimed at people with vulvas, but it's an amazing read and suitable for absolutely everyone. And within that, there's also exercises and suggestions about how to learn what turns you on and what gives you pleasure. But understanding your anatomy is something that needs to happen first, and understanding how sexual desire works.
Okay. All right.
So, and then to answer your question a bit more precisely, though, in terms of learning what we like, the first step to that is trying to get rid of all the conditioning of what we should like. So what we've seen on TV, penetrative intercourse in missionary position should make you orgasm in 3 minutes. If you love your partner, if you're a functioning woman, if things are right, unlearning all of that and starting again. And in fact, one of the best resources that I've read for that, again, it's a book. It's called Trans Sex. It's by an author called Lucie, Lucie, Lucy Fielding. And it's a book for coaches, therapists, medical professionals working with people who are transgender, for them to create an enjoyable sex life. And an exercise that she suggests for that kind of client is a kind of reimagining of the body, trying to get out of the idea that, as she puts it, a penis must be bobbed and a clitoris must be swirled. We think of the typical movements. And the way that I share this with clients is, if you were an alien spirit sort of suddenly dropped into your body and you knew nothing, you've never seen any porn or mainstream is just as bad as porn. You don't know anything. All you know is suddenly you have this physical body and wow, things feel nice. What would you do? How would you explore? Lucy Fielding calls it a reimagining of the body. So I would encourage everyone, literally everyone watching, if possible, to have a bit of a think about that. And if you have a masturbation, self-pleasure practice, to kind of explore yourself from the sense of, if I was suddenly dropped into this body. So we wouldn't go straight to the genitals necessarily. We might find we have amazing sensation elsewhere. Another exercise is if you could develop orgasmic levels of pleasurable sensation in a part of the body that wasn't the genitals, where would that be? Because we just go straight to the genitals in sex. I know I'm rambling a bit now, but as you can tell, I'm excited by the topic.
It's really interesting. Go on.
There's a concept called transfer orgasms. So I did a lot of campaigning and activism work around the rights of people with physical disabilities to have a sexual life and to be recognised as sexual beings. And within that community, I learned so much. And one of them was that people with paralysis affecting the genitals can develop orgasmic sensation capacity elsewhere. So I like to say to clients, for you, where would that be? And I'll typically share that for me, it would be my hands and forearms. Feet is a popular one. And that's part of this reimagining the body as a sexual tool. For you, uniquely, where's that sensation? And I had feedback once from a guy who was on my course who had said that, I think he was 38, late 30s. He said, for the first time, thanks to this, I've been able to acknowledge within myself first and then tell my partner that actually I get more turned on by having my ears lightly touched and sort of blown against and whispered in than by having my penis touched. And I've always felt wrong and ashamed because I'm a man. I should want that genital stimulation, but actually my ears, and that recognizing that had unlocked this whole new pleasure experience for him and his partner. So, yeah.
Okay. Wow. Very interesting. Yeah. Also, all the resources that you mentioned for people listening again will be linked up in the show notes. Just curious, what are your thoughts like? Because you hear Tantra, you hear this quite a lot at the moment, or that's at least what I think. What are your thoughts around that?
Around Tantra?
Yeah. Because it also sounds like something, if I don't know that much about it, but it also sounds like it is something where you explore your sexual energy and what you like yourself physically, or like it's not just about sex, right? It's about sexual energy, if I get that right. But it also sounds like a way to learn what you as an individual like. But I could be wrong in this, I don't know.
So I haven't done any Tantra courses. I'm not qualified in Tantra in any way. But from my understanding of it, from the few workshops and stuff like that I've been on, well, for a start, it's a vast area. There's ancient Tantra, there's Neo-Tantra, there's lots of different schools of Tantra. So if it's something that you're curious about, first of all, I would say try and learn about the differences. And I don't have a resource at the front of my mind to suggest with that. I know there is a great book called Urban Tantra. I can't think who it's by. But at its core, from my understanding, Tantra is recognizing that ultimately we are all about energy. Energy flow through the body, cultivating and building our erotic energy before then sharing it with somebody else.
Okay. Well, I'll link up the book
and
then.
And ultimately it's mindfulness.
I've heard you use the words in an interview that you did, sexurgy. What is sexurgy? Because I didn't know it. I had to look it up. But for people listening who don't know what that word means, what is it?
Sex surrogacy.
Oh, sorry. Wow, that's my bad English there. Yes, you're correct.
That's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this isn't a field that I'm directly involved in. but it's something which I have knowledge around.
Okay.
Sex surrogacy is physical sexual sessions to help people become more confident, more knowledgeable and more empowered about their bodies and about the bodies of partners. So when I was saying about transfer orgasms for people with with paralysis affecting sensation in the genitals, the way I first found out about that was by meeting a sex surrogate. She worked with people with physical disabilities who'd had accidents or injuries in getting to know their sexual bodies. And she actually worked with them physically. Another typical area for sex surrogacy is adult virgins. So imagine if you're a 40-year-old guy, you've never had physical sexual contact with someone else. So imagine all the shame around that. Imagine how impossible it might feel if the opportunity were there to have that kind of experience and to learn. Now, somebody in that situation might not want to visit a sex worker. So what we would have called years ago a prostitute. They might want instead an experience of learning, basically teaching. Sex surrogates teach people how to have sex, but in a physical, hands-on way. So the legality of this is obviously different in different countries. They might work with people with extreme physical disabilities who otherwise wouldn't have any kind of sexual experience or learning about themselves as sexual beings. But crucially, they're working on a kind of educational framework specific to that client to move them to a point where they can then go forward confidently in their own sexual life.
Yeah. Okay.
So a key difference between that and a sex worker might want this person to keep coming back as a repeat client.
Yeah, I see.
Whereas a sex surrogate will want to get you to the point where they go, off you go into your new gloriously empowered sexual life. There's a blog piece on my website about this. And actually it's out of my blogs, it's the one that gets the biggest number of hits. And I interview a sex surrogate on there about what exactly is the work about. And if people are interested, how do they find a surrogate?
All right. Very interesting.
There was also a great film called The Sessions, I think it was called, with Helen Hunt, based on a true story of a man with a degenerative condition who knew he only had a few years left of life, who'd never had sex. The only touch he'd experienced was medicalized, and he wanted to experience sex. So he found a surrogate, because a surrogate will also be very skilled around how to do that. So actually, I know someone who does do this work now, and she knows which hotels in London have hoists above the baths, for example, to help someone with limited physical ability get in and out of the bath. She knows where all the wheelchair accessible places are. I think it is incredible work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Really amazing. Yeah.
And you know someone who does that?
Yes. I wouldn't be comfortable sharing her name on here.
Okay. Yeah,
and I also know she's extremely, extremely busy.
Sure. Yeah.
But if anybody watching did want a London-based recommendation, then reach out to me and I can share that with her consent.
I see. Yeah. But it is beautiful work, right? And it's
amazing.
It's teaching, people. Like you said, it's not just about sex, but it's about education in the end. And
yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say one more thing, actually, related to the sex surrogacy?
Oh yeah.
I believe that the majority of us are sexual beings. It's part of the makeup of being human, and that to not be recognised as such, to have that denied, is very damaging. When I was doing work around the cause of the sexual rights of people with disabilities, it was incredible work because, for example, there was an annual strip show that I was involved in that was for an audience of people with physical disabilities. And it would be men and women And the most amazing thing was the women. They'd come in with like corsets draped across them in wheelchairs, feather boas, makeup, and they were very enthusiastic about the show. And I remember after the first time I'd done that, we'd go out and mingle in the audience. And this woman said to me, "Thank you for giving me, just for this one evening, an environment where I can express myself as a sexual woman, because the rest of the time I'm treated as if I am sexless."
Yeah.
It's this attitude when people are younger of they're never going to have sex within the very narrow confines of we think sex is penetrative intercourse. They're never going to have sex, so don't teach them about it. Don't tell them anything about it. And certainly don't ever treat them as if they're a sexual being. I think that's massively damaging. And I saw myself the power in simply being recognized. And if I look at you and you look at me and we have this recognition, you know, if I'm dancing of, hey, I'm sexy, you're sexy, we're both sexy, that doesn't translate into, therefore, we have to want to go to bed together. It's a separate thing. Erotic and sexual energy is a beautiful, I think, nourishing, healthy and important thing in its own right that doesn't have to then lead to an act of sex. And I think that's something that people have got so wrong. And it's something that stops people talking about sex. Oh, but if I talk about sex with my friend, what if we get a bit turned on? And what if we want to go to bed with each other? I'm trying not to use F word or anything here, but I think it's not like that. And yeah, that recognition that we're sexual beings is so important. And that's a part of sex surrogacy.
Yeah. And that's maybe suppressed by a lot of people too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, on to your question. Sorry.
No. Anything more that you can share on this is, I mean, it's super interesting. So don't mind. I mean, talking actually about, you know, the work that you did with disabled people, it was a workshop that you did there, right?
So I did various things. I took part in this annual striptease show that was dedicated for an audience of people with disabilities. I danced at care homes. I met a guy who worked for a charity called Deafblind UK. I met him when he brought a group of deafblind guys into the strip club that I was working at. He then eventually got sacked by the charity for taking clients to strip clubs. But he felt, these guys, why shouldn't they go to a strip club if they want to go to a strip club, just because they're deaf and blind? And he would organise these trips to this club that I used to work at that was very open and friendly and welcoming to all sorts of audiences. So that's how I met him. And then did some work with one client in particular, who was deaf and blind, on him recognising himself as an erotic being, as someone who could enjoy a striptease show. And we actually did that on stage at the Royal College of Medicine here in London, when they were voting to decide whether to recognise sex work as something positive for people with disabilities or not. That's also where I met the surrogate who I mentioned. And actually, there's coverage of this still exists online. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, please.
And so I performed on stage to this audience of medics for Jimmy, my deafblind client. And then he explained to the audience afterwards what it had meant to him in his journey with me to be recognised as an erotic being.
He was deaf
so I did
and blind?
Deaf and blind, yeah.
And how...
So he...
How did this look like in you know?
Yeah.
Do you know what I like?
He had... Yeah, I know. He had his assistant signing on his hand, explaining what I was doing. Yeah. And then he would say, for example, okay, she's coming closer. She's going to run her hair across your hand. And I would do that. So I would be communicating with JJ, his interpreter, so that he would have time to say, now this is going to happen. She's just taking her dress off. She's going to put it in your lap so you can feel the fabric, for example. Performing for him, it would be very much about how things felt, about perfume, softness of hair, all that kind of thing. But I'll send you a link to the report on that Royal College of Medicine Day. But then otherwise, I was doing a lot of fundraising for a charity called Outsiders, which helps people with disabilities find romantic and sexual partners. And there's an annual award show in support of that called the Erotic Awards.
Mm-hmm.
And I was nominated in the Stripper of the Year category. Nominated, didn't win, in my second year stripping. And then became very involved. I sat on the judging panel one year. I presented the award show a few years running, lap danced for charity at their parties endlessly. And after 10 years, I got recognised with an erotic award myself, recognising that 10 years of campaigning for the cause. Now, what's amazing now, in 2023, as we're recording this, is that the disabled community no longer kind of needs someone like me as an ally and promotional tool because of social media. So back then in 2004, if you wanted to get a story in the press about the sexual rights of people with disabilities, the way to frame that was, oh, look, there's this 6'4" stripper solitaire dancing at a care home for people with disabilities. That was what would get people interested and get the press writing. Whereas, as I say, these days, happily, with the online world and with social media and with accessibility, you don't need someone like me to do that. People can speak up and advocate for themselves now, which is amazing, obviously.
Yeah, it is. That's an amazing part of it. Yeah. And amazing work that you did, right? That's so beautiful, actually. And it's such a part that not being disabled, don't think about, right? That they too are indeed sexual beings. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. The resource for that in the UK certainly is a charity group called Undressing Disability. So I'll send you a link to share.
Okay.
And anyone who's interested in that topic and in learning more should check them out.
Cool. Yeah, definitely send it to me. Now, there are also, many people listening now who might not be disabled, but who also don't see themselves as erotic or sexy. What would you suggest to someone listening who feels this way?
To think so if they don't think they are erotic or sexy, how are they defining that? Who do they consider to be erotic and sexy? And maybe they'll bring to mind a character on a TV show or something, or maybe a real life celebrity who typically will fit society's standards of attractiveness, physical ability, age, all these things. And then to think, okay, well, who or what has taught you that that's what a sexually empowered, a sexy person is? And it's that same process that we discussed at the start of where has this belief come from? Can I trust the source of this belief? Is that source always correct? Then also, though, to think in whose benefit is it for me to feel that I'm not a sexual being, I'm not attractive? Being shut down like that, in whose benefit is it? Is it commercial corporations whose products I'm going to be buying in the hope that my skin will glow and that I'll achieve a certain body shape, for example? There's a concept of pleasure activism, which is saying, I don't fit the rules society sets of who's allowed to be sexual, but I'm going to go ahead and be it anyway. And then the last bit of advice would be to go out and look for the communities of people who mainstream society would say they're not allowed to be sexual, such as people with disabilities, and realise that all sorts of people who the mainstream might think aren't having a great sexy time are having a better time than the mainstream people. So again, this is where the online world is a fantastic resource. So maybe everybody should go and check out Undressing Disability, in fact. And then one more book recommendation. Magnificent Sex, Lessons from Extraordinary Lovers by Dr. Peggy Kleinplatz. She set out to survey couples who'd been together for 25 years or longer, and who reported themselves as having incredible sex. And she had far, far more responses than she'd imagined of couples saying, yeah, this is us. And she interviewed them about the keys to this long-term epic sex life. And they were not about age, looks, physical ability, socioeconomic status, kinky or vanilla tastes. It was not about that at all. It was about education, knowing one's body, being able to communicate with a partner, and approaching sex with a kind of curious and playful mindset. And that's something that all of us can do. And when you start to think in that way, combine all those last few things that I've said, and hopefully you would then start to feel more comfortable within yourself as a sexual being.
And how would you say for someone listening, because talking about what you want and being shy or insecure about it, to talk about that with your partner, it's a real thing, right? And especially if you've been in a marriage for 10, 20 years and you never did that, it's really, how do you do that, right? Maybe you're, with clients that you work with who have that problem, how do you do this? How do you start communicating about your desires to your partner when it is not the usual that you do?
Well, this could be a whole podcast in its own right. I have a workshop called Let's Talk About Sex, which is a workshop on sexual communication. The first step is to acknowledge that it's difficult. Acknowledge with your partner, this is embarrassing and strange, and isn't it weird? We talk about everything, but we've never talked about this. But a great tip is to use an outside tool. So this is where my TEDx talk has proven to be magic. I've had so many messages from people around the world saying, my partner and I have never talked about sex, but I watched your talk and I shared it with my partner, and then we talked about it. So it's much less threatening than sitting down. You and I are going to talk about our sex life. Instead, we're going to watch and discuss this other thing, and this other thing that is positive and has lots of actionable tips in it and is going to help us move forward. My TEDx talk, rather than let's talk about how bad things are. As a coach, I'm very positive and upbeat and saying, let's be led by pleasure. And then the other big tip around making communication easier is to listen to podcasts about sex, because we never hear these words out loud. You and I have talked to a degree now, but as we recognized at the very start, when you asked about shame, and I said the reason the shame remains partly is because we never talk about sex. So you listen to podcasts on sex, and on a reputable podcast platform, if you put sex in, you'll get education, not porn. And you'll be like, hearing all these things said out loud. Oh, I never knew how that was pronounced, even with certain words. Obviously, you're learning through the content educationally, but you're learning that it's okay to talk about sex. I do online webinars. There's lots of great sex educators there. Just become comfortable hearing sex spoken about. And hopefully, if you have a partner, they're up for doing the same thing, doing some listening, not necessarily together. Normalize the process of talking about it. And then you should be a lot more comfortable actually talking about it together.
Do you have any podcast suggestions?
Well, there's lots and lots of sex education podcasts out there. Yeah. I personally love one that's simply called Sexology Podcast with Dr. Nazanin Ma'ali.
Okay.
But that's, I was about to say it's quite sciencey. It's not sciencey, but for me as a sex educator, I absolutely love it. It teaches me new things. It gets me thinking about things, but it might not be for everyone. Put sex into your podcast platform and you will, I'm sure, find one that suits your tone of voice, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So, and also if you type in sexology podcast and you get other you will get other suggestions there too normally, right? So yeah, I mean, there's so many podcasts on this, but okay.
Yeah. And there's ones aimed at different age groups and all sorts. There's dedicated ones for people who had faith upbringings that have caused them problems. There's dedicated ones for monogamous married couples. There's all sorts out there. So enjoy exploring.
Which is good, because it's really about, like you said, normalizing this topic. If it's difficult for you to talk about it or to hear things about it, then normalize it, and it will become a lot. It's like exposing yourself to something that you're afraid of in a way. And if you do that more and more each time, it will become more normal and less scary. So, Ruth, I could throw, literally so many more questions at you. There's so much, sex is such an interesting topic. I skipped over quite a few questions because I also wanted to be respectful, for your time. But who knows, in the future, we'll do a round 2 or something. But thank you.
Yeah, viewers, if you want a round 2, let us know in the comments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But thank you for doing this interview, and really for this work that you're doing. I mean, you're a really well-spoken person, very knowledgeable, and very passionate about this topic. And we need more people like you doing this. So I really appreciated that you share all this out there in the world and that you do this work.
Thank you.
Before we end the interview, there is one last end question that I have for you that I ask all my guests. But before I ask that question, what is the best place for people to connect with you? Or is there a specific, place that you would like to send listeners to?
My website, which is ruthramsay.com. Now, if you're typing in Ramsay, the end is AY, not EY. People often misspell Ruth Ramsay. So ruthramsay.com. And then from there, you can access my Instagram, etc., etc. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of that people can easily access is my weekend newsletter. So it's called Something for the Weekend. It lands in inboxes at 7:00 on a Saturday morning. And what I aim to do each week is share something that readers can put into practice that weekend in their sex lives, whether they're single or partnered. So maybe there's been a new piece of research come out about sexual pleasure that I share and then say, how does this apply to you? Maybe there's been a theme that's kept coming up in my coaching that month that I write about, and then share a coaching exercise to help people understand more about that. That's my intent every week, is to help people learn, and also to provide a talking point. So people will say on a Saturday morning, as soon as I've woken up, I find your email and my partner and I snuggle in bed and we read it and we talk about it.
Okay.
So you can sign up for that at ruthramsay.com/weekend. And if any viewers are on Substack, so Substack is a social media writing platform. I'm on Substack as well now with the newsletter. So just search for Ruth Ramsay on Substack.
So for everyone listening, that will be linked up in the show notes. Sounds like a new email newsletter that I should sign up to. Sounds very interesting. So you'll see me added to it too then. I also saw on your website, by the way, that you have a couple of online workshops, like Feel Confident Naked, Understanding Your Erotic Mind, How to Please a Woman, which actually catched my eye immediately. I will also link them up in the show notes for people listening, because they looked very interesting. And I will also add, and I'm not saying that that might not change in the future, but they're also priced at a range that, everyone could buy it. It's not like some ridiculous €1,000 or dollar, price tag on it. So I do appreciate that actually as well. Everyone can buy this. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's my intention. Business coaches will say to me, the price needs to be way, way higher. Times it by 7 or 8. But I want everybody to be able to access this information. So those are 3 of the workshops that I've found are most useful among the 10, 12 or so workshops I have. And so that's why I've made those ones available instantly via the website.
I see. Okay. So also they will be linked up in the show notes. Ruth, the final end question that I have for you, and take your time with this. It can be very short or You can make it as long as you want. But from everything that you've seen, experienced, lived, and learned in your life, what is the one thing you know to be true?
That everybody who wishes to experience it has the capacity to enjoy sexual pleasure.
Ruth, thank you again for being here on the show.
Pleasure.
And that concludes my episode with adult sex educator and coach Ruth Ramsay. I hope that you did learn a whole bunch of things here in this episode and that it might have helped you maybe to break some of that stigma around sex or to help you just consciously better your sex life. Now, to find any of the resources mentioned in this episode, because Ruth did mention quite a lot of resources, a lot of great resources. So to find any of them, check out the show notes located in the description of this episode, or if you can't find them there, you can also go directly to the ipsproject.com/podcast and search for Ruth. There as well in the show notes, you can find all the ways to connect with her. With that, thank you once again for being here, and maybe I get to welcome you soon once again here on the IPS podcast. Until then, this is your host, Jelis Vaas, signing off. Before you take off, if you already feel like you've gained many lessons and insights from this episode and you want to continue your journey of personal growth, be sure to take a look at the IPS Academy, where we offer in-depth, quality and fun online courses from experts that have appeared here on the podcast. Learn from a 2-time world record holder how to master goal setting and confidence. Learn from a certified stress educator how to manage your stress and live a more balanced life. Learn from a therapist how to heal past wounds, and learn from a neuroscientist to master your mindset. These are but some of the course topics you can find at the IPS Academy. Each course we offer is made with fun animations and stunning illustrations. There are also a few lessons to try for free, so you can get a taste of what the course is like. We have countless reviews from other students, so you can see what others think. And last but not least, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee if you end up not liking the course. If any of this sounds interesting to you, you can check out our courses by going to theipsproject.com/academy or by clicking on the link in the description of this episode.